Hello and welcome back to another episode of Daffy's Roundtable. Our guest for this week is both a rock star and an OG reptile keeper. He has been keeping and breeding reptiles for over 30 years and is responsible for bringing a bunch of different species into Canada. And of course, breeding and spreading the reptile hobby for everyone to enjoy. I'm talking about Darren Boyd of the Reptile Rainforest. Join me as I hear some crazy stories from the past about being one of the only people in the area with a reptile room and about his time working at zoos in Florida. We then also discuss the changes in the hobby over time and what some of Darren's concerns are with the hobby moving forward. We also talk about what Darren is currently doing with his collection, both breeding wise and what species he's working with, and we talk about education shows and why they are also an important part of the reptile hobby. Before we get into all of that, though, allow me to thank Exoterra for sponsoring this podcast and making this episode possible. Exoterra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. Okay, without further ado, everyone, please help me welcome Darren Boyd of Reptile Rainforest. Darren, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm super excited to do this episode. We've chatted a bunch at expos, but over the
Yeah.
past couple of days we chatted more, and I've been, I checked out your website, and yeah, I was just telling you, you've done so much more than I even realized you've done in your
Okay.
experience in this hobby.
Yeah.
Today we have an hobby OG, and yeah, let's just dive right into it.
Sounds good.
Give us maybe like a quick summary of the Darren story. How did you get into reptiles in the first place?
Oh, wow. Okay. Quick story. Man, when I was, I think I was about 7 years old, and I'll make this quick because I don't want to be like
No,
drag
no,
it
take
out
your
more and
time.
more.
Take your time.
But
Yeah, yeah.
well, it did two things happened to me that changed my life kind of almost simultaneously. One was I got my first Kiss and Alice Cooper records that sent me on this
Nice.
path, and then there's Alice Cooper with a snake, right? And then um, I living in Quebec in this small town, back road, just a typical, small town road. And here's the what really I've loved animals my whole life, but this was an experience even at that age that stuck with me. Was my brother is 5 years older than me, and his friend found a garter snake on the lawn. So they pick it up and they're playing with it, and here's this lady uh, coming down the street with a stroller with a baby in it. And she saw the snake and just like the reactions were so different. Like we were excited about the snake and she started sobbing, abandon the baby. That's like the end
Freaking
of
out.
it, right? Yeah. And even at 7 years old, I kind of went, it's an animal, right? And then it's not hurting us, so why is she so scared? So and that's not a judgment, it's just my mind going, what's going on here? And so for years I was fascinated by them the rest of my life and wanted to provide a voice for those animals when they needed it, and that's kind of what got me into it, and just sort of educating people. To bring that all around though,
That's awesome.
I have been afraid, like deathly afraid of spiders my entire life. So I
Okay.
kind of get now I understand her reaction. Like just a tiny little spider, my heart races, my skin crawls. I find them fascinating, but yeah,
Have you been able to break that or not yet?
no, you know what? I've tried. Um, I've worked with spiders. When I was in Florida, I spent. See, I was the guy afraid of spiders, so they made me get rid of the black widows that were on the zoo property. Like go around and
That's hilarious.
yeah. So what I used to do is I would scoop them up and put them in a little container, and I would bring them to Crutchfields or somewhere like that, and I'd sell them for. He'd give me like $7 a piece for them, which at that time minimum wage wasn't even $4 an hour. So I was like, uh, bonus for me. I was selling these black widows. Um,
That they were
but
just
yeah,
getting rid of anyway.
yeah, they were just like, what was going to happen? I was going to go put them out in the field. So I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to go and sell them and make some money. But to be honest, though, they were pretty easy to manipulate to work with, just to shoo into a container. They weren't aggressive or fast or anything. And so it's nothing to do with my personal safety. It's just seeing a spider. There's this repulsion that I have, and I
Yeah,
know I'm not the only snake person like that. There's other reptile people that are afraid of spiders and centipedes and whatnot. So
a lot more. I was surprised. A lot more than I was expecting. Many of the reptile keepers that I hang out with are actually also terrified of spiders or tarantulas, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
But
I
I
think.
love scorpions.
Oh,
Like
do you?
I,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no problem there.
So it's not the eight-legged bug thing.
No, not exactly. No, and in fact, my basement is all reptiles, like set up for my business. Wasn't always that way. There's a long history of what my business has been and where it's been, but that's where it is right now. And um, I get the daddy long legs all over the place in the basement, and they don't bother me for what, as long as they don't take me by surprise, they can just hang out
And
and
hang out.
do their thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I sometimes see some in my reptile room, and I'm like, you can stay there and eat any escaped crickets.
Yeah. Yeah, and
But
then the
okay,
spiders get bigger, right? They're eating just
it definitely happens. It definitely happens. I've
yeah.
seen some monster sized spiders down there. But okay, awesome. So that was how you got into reptiles. When did you start working with them, and what was that process like?
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, always, even when I was a kid, I was out herping. I didn't, there wasn't a word for it, at least I didn't know, but my entire life I'd be out catching frogs and
Yeah,
tadpoles and whatever. Um, and then I dragged them home, turtles, whatever I could, and my parents would tolerate it for a day or so and say, "Okay, go, let it go," right?
yeah,
Which was the right thing to do, right?
for sure.
But I'm glad I had that hands-on experience, not so much as a keeper, just as an enrichment of my own life, right? To experience nature like that. And but yeah, so I spent a lot of my life focusing more on music and touring and stuff like that. But somewhere, I think in my late teens, I started to actually get like exotic reptiles and keep them. And so it's been going on for a while. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. And then so first you were just a regular hobbyist, or I guess you were.
yeah.
So maybe let's touch on that really quickly. You said you were touring and doing all that music stuff. Was that sort of your career at the time? Where you I know you
Yeah,
still I think you still maybe write music for other people and often play in other bands as well. Is that
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I've been doing my own thing. So again, not to go on a lot. This could take forever with some of these stories, but
no
um,
problem.
I've been doing that. It was somewhere. It was 2019, or sorry, 2015. I was in a car accident, and that I was in five bands at that time. You know, just really busy, plus the business, right? So I was just I would sort of do double duty. So I would do a fair, for example, or a campground, and I would do a reptile show and a band show the same,
That's awesome.
or do one and then travel to the next. And that so
Wow.
somebody ran a red light into me, and it messed up my life for about 3 years almost.
Wow.
So as a result, all of the music stuff kind of changed direction. So I started doing my own solo stuff, and because I could just stay at home and work on it, and it's taken on a whole different life, and somewhere became a legitimate project. And yeah, a bunch of award nominations and stuff. I just got back from Nashville. So yeah, it's still going very much, but
That's awesome.
now I'm a mild mannered librarian by day, which is like it's that is the dream job, really.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
get to read reptile books all day.
Yeah, yeah. You know what the best thing? Honestly, we get a lot of kids' reptile books, which of course I have no influence on whatsoever, but we get all these kids' reptile books, and they're just so great. Like so many of them. And I often read them to remind myself when I'm doing like reptile shows, which is something I've been doing for about 30 years. So that's part of it's 50% of my business is education. So I'll travel around to, summer camps and all that stuff. And I was just doing one yesterday, and I often will read these kids' books because the facts are really simple and they're what people want to know, right? They're
Yeah,
not
the language
just,
is
yeah.
more accessible. Yeah.
And of course, and I find myself as a hobbyist kind of, why am I talking about morphs or what? Like kids don't care about
N-
selective
n-
breeding. They don't,
They don't understand the stuff. Yeah, yeah.
no, right. And so I have to, it's two different things. And I find you can overlap them a little bit, but generally speaking, the general public who are at these shows of all ages don't want to know the deep details of the stuff that we would talk about.
For
They want
sure.
to know how big it gets, how long it lives, is it dangerous? Like, what
What
does
does
it
it
eat?
eat? Yeah,
All that
yeah,
stuff, and rightfully so. That's what they want to know. So that's what you have to give them.
for
And
sure.
so sometimes
Beginner
those
level.
books, yeah, and those books kind of bring me back to that reality. Like, oh yeah, that's a neat fact I hadn't thought about. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
That's awesome. And then so okay, so now that we've discussed all that, maybe we'll quickly jump to the progression of your work in the hobby. So when did you you said you lived in Quebec. When did you make the move to Florida and start
Oh,
working there?
okay. So the Quebec was only, I think it was 5 years, but we left right around the time I was 7. Moved to Toronto,
Okay.
and we're only there for, I don't know, less than 2 years, and then moved to where I live now, which is Kemptville, south of Ottawa. And so I've been here for forever. And I moved to Florida to go to zoo school. That's why I moved there. And then I came back and opened my business. I was like 95. So yeah, that's like, it's like, how did I get this old? How did this happen?
When you have this much fun, time flies, right? You're
Yeah,
making music on one side, you're playing with reptiles on the other. I can't imagine a better life, to be honest.
yeah, yeah, you're right. And sometimes it's easy to kind of gripe and grumble about things, and because it's not always easy. Things don't always go your way, but then I have to remind myself that I wouldn't trade most of these experiences for anything, right? It's is what I've chosen to do, and
Absolutely.
if I even chose it, like there's a great
It shows
quote.
you.
Yeah, and I think being um, a herp keeper or in that business, whether it's a business or a hobby, is very similar to being a musician in the sense that there's a quote I wish I knew who said it. If you want to be a musician, don't do it because it's the worst life. If you have to be a musician, then do it because it's the best life. And it's kind of like that for someone into reptiles too. It's like
It's a
you,
need. You have
yeah,
to
it's
do it.
like
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
there have been times where I'm like, "Oh, life would be simpler if I didn't do all this stuff." And then it's like, yeah, but then what?
What would I do?
It's
Absolutely.
what would I do? I'd find something else equally as idiotic to fill my time.
And time consuming. Exactly. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
a lot of times it's like, what would I be doing if I wasn't feeding reptiles all the time or cleaning
yeah. I'd
cages? It's
be
like,
feeding cats is what I'm already doing.
or just sitting down and doing nothing and watching TV. And it's like, well, what's more
Yeah,
enjoyable anyway?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. Awesome. Okay. So zoo school, that's awesome. First of
Mm.
all, and then I guess as part of the zoo school, you had to work at the zoos.
That was the main thing. It was very hands-on. So, and I worked with a lot of reptiles. There was I guess probably a whole semester of venomous snakes. So I
That's
spent a
awesome.
lot of time with that stuff. I mean, I just, when I travel and I go herping, then I sort of like to mess around with things I probably shouldn't. But as far as like keeping, like probably emperor scorpions is as dangerous as I get. And
Right.
which is funny because people uh, tend to underestimate them. They're great. Like I wouldn't use any other scorpion for shows, but I don't let other people handle them. I was stung by one once,
Wow.
and well, more than once, but I had a couple of like dry stings. They're reluctant to sting, but I had one good sting and it took 2.5 months to heal. So just to give a little bit of perspective on that, because a lot of people think, oh, they don't sting, and they're like, here, let their kids, handle them and stuff, and
For sure.
just be
What
careful.
what was the like, was it a swelling, or like what was the reaction?
It was all, like necrosis. There was no, I've been stung. I don't know what it is. Past few years, every single stinging insect outside seems to like me, like wasps and stuff. And I remember finding it really fascinating. I got stung almost the ankle by a wasp or a hornet or something. I didn't see it, but stung me, and almost immediately I had this like almost like a like, if you have a migraine that like, so it just bam hit me here, even though I got stung down there. So it's definitely um, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like a neurotoxin in there, whereas the scorpion was all hemotoxin. It was just tissue damage. There was
And just
nothing else.
local to the bite.
Yeah, so it was like a big blood blister that just wouldn't heal,
Wow.
and yeah, so not a big deal. But I'm just thinking, what if somebody had an allergic reaction, right? Then what?
Yeah,
So
or what if it was a young child, like you mentioned? Like
yeah,
that's probably going to
yeah,
react a little bit worse
yeah.
than an adult.
Yeah, exactly. And when I do my shows, I don't I let people touch some of the animals, of course, but I don't let anybody hold them, and I don't there's certain ones like the scorpion, it's just like you can look at it, but um
Be careful.
just yeah, that's it. I mean, everybody has their own way of doing things, but I just like to be really careful. And my insurance company has no sense of humor about this stuff whatsoever either. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And then
yeah.
actually, maybe one other thing we'll or maybe we'll stick to the Florida, then we'll jump to the
Sure,
publishing.
yeah.
But so did you work with any other species while you were there besides reptiles? Did you have to do mammals as well and
Oh
all sorts
yeah,
of stuff?
I guess that's what I was gonna say is even though I did work with like crocodiles and rattlesnakes and all this stuff. I most of what I did because when I moved to Florida, I brought it was like 65 reptiles with me, and I
From
accumulated yeah
here?
from here, yeah.
Wow.
So um, so I had to get like export re import permits and all. It was a long process, and so I knew I was bringing them back, but I came back with about 300. So that's how that went. Um, but while I was down there, I was the guy working with reptiles at home all the time. So I got to work with, jaguars and tigers and,
Hmm.
like every kind of bird imaginable, all this other stuff, which was fantastic. And I kind of miss that a lot of the times, I miss like all of the different creatures that you form a bond with. Like,
Absolutely.
in the time that I was there, like especially the cats, and the monkeys and stuff, they get to know you and you have some sort of relationship. And
Yeah, it's a little bit different than reptile keeping for sure.
yeah, but
It's
although I have to
even birds, I
say,
find.
yeah, and birds, but I have to say, and this could raise eyebrows, but I got to tell you, um, back then, I mean, just globally, zookeepers and reptile people just thought reptiles were all operating on instinct and they weren't very bright and didn't have any awareness and all this. And I see it every day. Now, if you're open to and you pay attention, there's a lot more going on there, and they're a lot smarter than, I have a red-footed tortoise
I
named
agree.
Turbo. He lives outside in the backyard. He's a rescue, and he's still growing, but he lives out in the yard in the summer, and he has these behaviors like, and anybody who keeps tortoises in that kind of environment will probably give you similar um, accounts of their behavior. I don't know that he knows his name, but when I go and call him, he does come, and it's like Jurassic Park, all that everything. He's just like, but it's probably because he's like, that's the guy with the food, right? He knows, so he
Yes.
comes. However, he has certain times of day when he knows that I'm going to bring him inside, so I have to bribe him because I'll call him and he's like, "Nope, I know what you're up to." So he
You
throws a
learn the
little
routine.
tantrum. Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, bearded dragons. If you ever watch them in a group, um, there's definitely some interaction and some learned behavior for sure. And you can tell you're looking at these even anoles. You look at them and they're looking right in your eyes. They're looking back at you. And in fact, that's how I learned to catch them when I lived in Florida. I always try to catch little. Well, greeners were more common then than they are now. The browns have kind of taken over.
The
The
browns are
daisy,
everywhere now. Yeah.
yeah. But either way, it doesn't matter. If you try to catch one on a tree, they just kind of go up the tree, right? And I realized they're looking right in your eyes. So if you kind of go up like this, where you're going at them, but you're not looking at them, directly, they watch you, but they're watching your eyes, but they think you're not coming for them because it's a neat trick and it works, and then you can catch
Just
them.
grab them. That's super
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I will say
yeah.
I was in Florida in April just for a couple of weeks,
Oh,
and
nice.
I tried very hard. and I failed miserably I could not catch a single one of those in nose. I
Oh,
saw them everywhere.
I wish I would have
But,
told you that before,
but
because
yeah,
you'd see the difference. It's a neat trick. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Next time I'm gonna have to give that a try. But yeah, they're I was shocked at how fast they are. And
Yeah.
how yeah, they're yeah. It was a very interesting experience. I've got a lot of reptiles, like just randomly, and I don't think anything has given me as hard of a time as catching those adults.
Yeah.
um, but awesome. Okay, so you came back with 300 animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was some of the stuff you were working with back then?
Um, yeah, and that's an interesting thing because I'm still known for being kind of a corn snake guy,
Yeah.
but I was pretty big into sand boas, rosy boas, and I've written a bunch of articles for Reptiles magazine that for sand boas for over the years. Um, and what else? I'm trying to think. Like house snakes, I still work with them a bit. Back then, I was really working with everything. Like I had like a mass of, at the time anyway, like a big group of leopard geckos, and that wasn't a common thing in Canada at that time. Fat tails, I was breeding. I was breeding ball pythons too, but they were, I mean, they were just wild ball pythons back
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
their morphs had start. I think the only morph I knew of was the albino at that time, which was like expensive, like
For
really
sure.
expensive.
And probably a big thing as well at that time.
Oh yeah, yeah, it was like the dream snake. Now, and it of course, I I still love ball pythons, but I made a deliberate decision to stop breeding them about a dozen years ago, 12, 13 years ago. I think I had one clutch from retainment, that came
Yeah.
sort of like, what happened here? But it's they're often, I think most breeders and most keepers have good intentions and they do try to be responsible. But nobody seems to talk about the fact that they can live for over 50 years. I think the record I just found out like within the past couple of weeks is something like 65 years. Last I heard was 52. There's one around 65.
65.
Yeah. And
A
so,
ball python.
yeah, yeah. And I have two
Wow.
of them that are in their mid 40s. So
Wow.
yeah, and this is kind of what bothers me is that I don't really consider them a beginner's pet. But a lot of times people go, "Well, these normal ball pythons are byproducts of what we're trying to do." So, you know, throw them out
You're
into
super cheap.
super cheap, throw them out, call them a beginner's pet, and I have um, no shade to ball python breeders or to the snakes, but it's like it kind of concerns me for the future, because we have to consider these things more than ourselves, right? It's a bigger
For sure.
picture.
Do
And
corn snakes not live that long?
no, I mean, a 30-year-old one is possible. I don't know what the record is. It might be longer than that, but usually the under 20. And uh, I've had some long animals for a long time. I had an African pixie frog live 28 years in my care. Like I got it as a baby. um, I had a what is it, a tokay gecko live for about 30 years. Now it wasn't, I didn't have it the whole time, but I knew where it came from and how long it was. So most people think they live about 10, 12 years, but
Yeah, my
and
assumption was like 15 to 17 ish,
yeah,
maybe. But
so it
yeah.
was about 30 years. The Sandbo, as I was talking about, same thing. I had the last one a few years ago, the last one of my first two that I got, and that's what got me into them. They were actually left in somebody's apartment in Aylmer, and I ended up with those two. And the breeding stock that I have today, a lot of still part of the
Yeah.
group, which is really cool because there's some neat stuff coming out of them. But yeah, lived about 30 years. And so, you know, it's the same thing when it comes to tortoises and turtles and that. Like, you have to consider you, you really want a 60-year-old demanding pet. It's a lot of,
Same thing with sulcatas too. Do you really want a 60-year-old gigantic
yeah,
animal? It's bigger than the size of a dog. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
even the redfoot, like even with Turbo, obviously we live in Canada. He cannot live outdoors, so he has to come inside. And Um, so I have him in something in the winter that and this is what one of the changes and one of the things that I'm sort of reverting back to where I started, which is trying to give them bigger and better environments, right? And I feel like I'm not there yet. I'm still learning, still finding space, still streamlining what I'm doing, and I think that's important to realize. Like, it's not over. It's I can
I
always do better. And but when he's bored or wants to eat more, which tortoises always do, he'll throw a bit of a tantrum and he bangs against the wall, and it's really annoying. So he's I'm really fortunate because I love him to death. He's such a personality, and I feel like I'm so grateful to have him in my life. But um, yeah, not for everybody, man. That's like,
for
it's
sure. Yeah, no, no,
it's a
definitely not for
commitment.
everybody.
No,
Yeah, I think like snakes and lizards and all these other things are one thing, and then tortoises and turtles are a whole different ballgame.
mm,
I,
yeah.
I, I agree. They're
Well,
just the amount of responsibility that they need, I think, is way more than anything else.
yeah, it's true. And I have a blue tongue skink that's I think she's 27 this year, and I've used that one. Might be a boy, but I've been called it's named her Jessica when she was a baby, and I'm not breeding them, so I don't care. But I use that one every single show I think I've ever done, and that's a lot in 28 years that she has come with me. And um, that skink, 28 years, I saw something, it was a magazine article or something, and there's a picture of a kid holding a blue tongue skink, and beside it's like a grown man holding the same skink, and it's like 42 years difference or something like that. And some people were going, "Oh, come on, no way, that's not." And I'm like, man, I have no reason to doubt that at all. Like,
Wow,
these, they hang on for a long time, and especially if you do take care of them well,
for
which
sure.
doesn't have to always be complex setups. It's just giving them the needs that and the basic needs that are important to them, and not
Yeah,
not living a life of stress too. You know.
for sure. And maybe we'll get back to the animals, but maybe just while we're on this topic, what would you as maybe we'll just I don't know how to phrase this, as not to put you in the corn snake corner again, but like for
I,
using corn snake as an example, what would you say suitable habitat would be?
it's a good question because the way I guess maybe it's an old school thing. I kind of do herpetoculture kind of like I cook, which is to say that I don't measure anything. I'm,
Right.
and so I'm not especially good when it comes to saying, like, people will say, well, how long is a snake? I'm like, I don't know. Like, how do you measure a snake? I don't know. They don't go in a straight line.
Yeah.
Or what does it weigh? Everybody weighs everything now. And I have a scale. I weigh some stuff especially if I'm concerned about them, but I don't weigh, like, if I have crested gecko babies, like, people weigh them, and I don't know. It's fine. I'm not, again, no judgment. I look at them. I kind of feel the air. That's just maybe it's an old school way, but it's paid off. It's worked pretty well for me. But maybe not everybody has that,
The eye
you
for
know,
it.
the eye or the feel. Like, sometimes you can put your hand in the cage and go, well, that's too hot or too cold. I
Yeah.
don't know. I know that's a weird way of doing things, but I'm not saying that's the only way. I do have temp guns and all. I have the equipment and stuff.
For sure.
Anyway, to answer your question though, I think the one thing that we often neglect, and I say we, including myself, is their love of climbing. So if you can get a terrarium that has both space, ground space and height, that's a really good thing because corns love to climb. Um, Temperature wise, I always say, think Florida, southern US, where they're from. And they're unlike ball pythons. Again, I'm not dissing ball pythons, but they're more sensitive when it comes to temperature fluctuations, things like that. Corn snakes, I often say, if you're not sure, start off cooler. and then you can always raise it up. You can't come back from cooking an animal, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
want to make sure because they can handle it if it's a bit cold. Um,
Yeah, and they I mean they brewmate and or depending on I guess where what area they come from,
yeah.
but
Well,
some
I mean, I think even in Florida, um, unless it's real South Florida, it still gets cool enough for a few months anyway to for them to have a dormant
right.
period.
Okay.
And I do brumate all of my snakes for breeding. Well, I mean, like all of my colubrids anyway. My hognose, corns, they all kind of go in the same room. I have a room that is like it's kind of I call it my cool room for that reason, but it's probably just what I don't know whoever lived here before was storing stuff, and it's
Yeah,
yeah, and so I put in them in that room, and I keep an eye again with the temp gun and stuff, make sure that it's not. And if I hear that it's going to be really really cold, it might concern me, but I make sure I keep an eye on them, and they always have water and that kind of thing. And
do you
yeah, and
feed them at all during this time?
no feeding. And I make sure that they haven't eaten for at least 2 weeks, usually a little more. I gradually, what I do is I take them all and I put them into Rubbermaid bins, with the holes drilled on the side, and I make sure that they all stack up and sit on the floor beside the door of that room. They get a lot of, it's cooler, way cooler than it is in their in their own environments.
For
And
sure.
then I gradually put them in there. And I've never lost an animal. I've been doing this for like a long time, and I've never lost an animal through that. Um, but I like the concerned parent that, like, if it gets
Checks
really
every 20
cold,
minutes.
yeah, it's like I still feel like if it gets too cold, I get a little concerned, particularly with the hog nose because they probably don't get to the same level of cold that the corns can handle.
Yeah.
So
How long are they in the cold room for?
usually I start right after Christmas, and I used to wait till January, but it just depends. Like, and the break is actually really good for me because
Yes, for sure, for
you
sure.
know you get the summer is so busy. It's really wild because everything. Sometimes I like why can't things drag out through the winter? But I have all of my summer camp shows, all that stuff, and I'm still working. I'm still have
And you have babies to feed, and you have
yeah, all the
snakes.
babies are all at the same
Yeah,
time. Yeah, and of course the any sort of summer music shows happen and traveling and stuff. And I'm like, why all within 2 months or something? Why
yeah.
can't this be? So a bit of a break by cooling the animals down. And I have I like black rat snakes too, and any of my um, native wildlife I obviously have to have a permit for because of my shows, and that's why I do. It's why I have them. Um, I have a snapping turtle as well. I don't have as many native Ontario animals as I did before because what happens is when they do get older and die, it's not something you can just go and replace. Like,
You have to get a new
really,
permit for it.
yeah. Well, getting a permit is not easy because how do you replace it? You can't go out and collect them out of the wild. So there has to be a legal way to obtain them. You can't just say, "Well, that one died. I'm going to go grab another one." Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Something
unless
through a rescue or a shelter or something.
yeah, and you also you can't just go to I don't know, say somebody else that keeps them because, for example, unless you have a license to propagate, which I don't, not those, you can't. Like in other words, if somebody came to me saying, I have a permit, I do these shows, and I want a black rat snake. There was a period where I was allowed to breed them, and that was one of the things that I was doing was supplying some of the other um, educational businesses with them. I couldn't sell them, but I could give them to them. But now I can't do that. So yeah, so neither can most people. So
Yes, yeah.
it's not easy to replace them. So yeah. How did I get on this topic? I don't know. Oh yeah, because we're talking about cooling because those
Yes,
guys are
yes.
a strange thing because I'm not as busy, but I still do shows in the winter. Um, so by having multiple rat snakes, I'll often keep one sort of awake for a while. And um, there was I think the aquatarium in Brockville, they have their own now. I don't know. Yeah, but for a while I would let them use one of mine for the winter.
Is it worth checking out?
The aquatarium?
Yeah, I've never
Yeah, I
been
think.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think you'd like it for sure. I mean, there's they have a beaver.
Who doesn't love beavers?
Yeah, there you go. If you're Canadian, you love beavers. So yeah,
Yeah,
and his name is Justin Beaver. Beaver. So
that's awesome.
yeah.
Uh, so from what you're currently working with, is it mostly colubrids now?
Yes, except for the sand boas. Trying to think. Yeah, so hognose, sand boas, and corns, and I still do some geckos, fat tails, and cresteds and stuff, but not a lot. I mean, it's I kind of again the cresties I limited because I just see so many,
Hmm.
and um,
Market is a little rough right now.
yeah, so it's not a matter of like whether or not I could sell them. It's just there just seems to be a lot, so I don't really need to contribute, I guess.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. Absolutely.
corn snakes, I've never stopped breeding, and sometimes I'll do that. I'll like sort of jump in and jump out of certain species based on what I see. But I'm surprised uh, by the changes in certain ways, like um, what are they called? The Mexican black king snakes, for example. When
Yeah.
I was like, I brought some back from Florida, again, going back to the mid 90s, and they were like $35 a piece, and you had trouble giving them away. Now, what was the price I said? It was like around $200
Two
or
hundred
something.
dollars. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's what they go for at like expos, 200, two
yeah.
fifty roughly.
It's like,
Yeah.
man, I should have kept breeding them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But honestly, I've never cared about the money. I mean, yes, I have to pay my bills like everybody else, and so it's not that I don't keep an eye on like some of that, but I it's never been like, oh, look at the price of that. I need to get in on that. It's
yeah.
I work with what I like. There was probably periods like, I mean, we always learn, we always go through these things throughout our lives, and I remember like certain ones that I wanted to get in on because of the price, but not just because of the price, but because I liked them. But there's some motivation there, like um, I don't know, if you're in business, you try to make money.
For sure.
But then I learned pretty quickly that if it's not something that I'm really into, it doesn't.
You
Yeah,
won't be successful with it.
no, exactly. It's not, and that's why I always tell people that if you want to get into breeding, just do what you love to keep the animals that you're really into. And so I've loved hognose snakes from the beginning for my whole life. I've been breeding them for yeah since like the mid '90s. Same as corns were ahead by a couple of years, but I've always been breeding hognose and yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we'll touch on that too as well. For like you said, maybe in terms of price or just in other ways, how do you feel the hobby has changed over time here in Canada or just in general?
Um, I haven't I haven't hit too many like US expos or anything in quite a long time. As far as Canada, probably not much different. I mean, you go to an expo and you see a lot of ball pythons still, and you see a lot of crested geckos and stuff. And, um, I have no problem with that, but it seems to be a lot more people are trying to be specialists than like
Just kind of breeding everything.
yeah, and that's kind of what I was doing. I was breeding like it didn't anything. I was breeding brown basilisks and just
Anything you
things
can
that,
get on.
yeah, like anything because it was, uh, even though I was selling animals and it was a business, it was truly a hobbyist mindset where I just loved all of them. And then you kind of learn what you really want to spend your time with after a while. But I think that's the difference. Is and it's of course grown, which is amazing.
Do
Like,
you feel like it's grown like a lot?
well, when I was doing the first shows in that I was doing in Canada, we were down. I remember like Mississauga, Lakeshore Boulevard, a little Legion, and there were about in between 20 and 30 vendors. And so you could look across and see, everybody knew everybody. You just look across, hey, what are you selling leopard geckos for? Oh, like, okay. So everybody, there wasn't, now you can't get away from your table, and it's just like a sea of other, breeders and keepers.
Giant.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So this is not a bad thing. It's nice that when the general public, who a lot of people don't know anything about reptiles, can come to one of these events and see. There's like you can see the seriousness of it now. You can see that people are really into this, and it means a lot to them. But back then, it was a bit like when I moved. Here's a good example. When I moved back to Canada, and I'm thinking, this is great. I came back feeling, educated, experienced. I'm opening my business, and I didn't expect a witch hunt, but that's what it ended up being. And it's a story that most people don't know much about, but it, I mean, the things I could write a book and you would be like, no, you got to be kidding. Like, this stuff really happened.
What do you
And
mean by witch hunt?
the town, the mayor, most of the council, a lot of the concerned citizens did not want me here. And there were
Because of the
town meetings. Like, and I'm not even joking about this. They had the meter maid who would go around writing tickets, and that because we didn't. It was a small town, right? They didn't have a bylaw officer at the time. They appointed her. This is your new job. Now you're the bylaw officer. It had nothing to do with people putting their garbage out at the wrong time or anything like that. It was all they were calling it the Snake Bylaw. Like, it was all the whole thing. And they were going after me hard. They were making up laws and doing, it was just crazy. Go calling the SPCA who came to visit, and I mean, it's like I could go on. This is really something, but it was all over. It was like even on the news in Ottawa, like the CTV News or whatever it was, or CJOH, or all of it. They were all covering it in the newspaper every week. And it was the reason why I call it a witch hunt is because no matter how professional I tried to be, and keeping in mind I probably was a little uh, cockier than I needed to be at this point, but I was also pushed in a corner, right? So I was defending
Mm.
myself, and but the mayor, like the quote was like, snakes are very, very scary looking. That was the quote in the newspaper. I mean, this is the stuff that we were dealing with, and now
Wow.
and so not to like pat myself on the back for being a trailblazer or anything, but we don't we still have these problems. We're still going up against bylaws and stuff, and this
Yes.
is why I have a bit of experience with this, because of the you think that you're thinking like a rational person, like, I'm not hurting anybody, I'm doing,
Hmm.
I love these animals and nobody's in any danger. But that doesn't matter in the eyes of somebody who opposes what you're
Who's
doing.
scared or opposes? Yeah.
Yeah, the knee-jerk reaction, and we've seen the bylaws happen. I wrote the bylaws, the reptile bylaws for Kempville. Like, that was kind of the compromise. Um, and so, like,
Wow.
yeah, and but yeah, because they adopt a bylaw from another municipality is usually what it is. So you can't keep a walrus in Kempville, like as
Who's
though
keeping
it's
walruses?
as though it's ever been a problem. Where
Yeah.
did this come from? Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, that's why, like, now I say I worry about things like ball pythons. Again, I hope nobody thinks I'm like taking aim at ball
You're
python
okay.
keepers. That's
You're
not my
okay.
issue. My
Most
issue is
guests
that,
will.
yeah, well, the issue and the concern is that if we don't let people know that start out with ball pythons, and we just keep breeding them and pumping them out there, and people don't know how long they live, and people are going to start letting them go, and it's already happened. This isn't new, but within 5 or 10 years, we still have like red-eared slider rescues, right? Because of what happened with them
Yeah.
just being released. Now,
We
red-eared
I still
sliders
see
can.
them outside. Like they're still. Yeah.
Oh yeah, now they've established that
Yeah.
they can live, ball pythons. I
Would
don't think
not.
that'll happen, you know.
Yeah.
But they're still going to be terrifying to people when they come across them in a park somewhere or something with their kids, because it's very obviously not a local snake,
Yes.
and people are going to start dumping them. And I mean, maybe I sound like I have no faith in humanity, but I mean, come on, we
Not much.
know this is going to happen, and what's going to happen is that's when there's already bylaws in places because of this, and again, the bylaws are going to tack on everything, horn snakes and
It just gets
geckos,
worse
and
and worse.
yeah, so
Absolutely.
we have to start considering, because, like I said, the red-eared slider rescues are going to eventually. I hope I'm wrong, but 5-10 years they're going to be ball python rescues.
Yes.
Just,
It's already
and
starting.
has it?
It's already
Oh,
starting. Yes.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I'm out of the loop. I haven't heard of it, but I'm just predicting it because of knowing they're not that exciting. And a
Yeah.
lot of people get into them for the wrong reasons. They want to make money, and they think they're going to, become big name breeders and have a fortune, and maybe they will. But
Yeah.
that's, to me, that shouldn't be the main reason. And eventually, a lot of people get a collection and realize that it didn't work out as well as they thought it would, and it's taking longer or whatever, and now they're bored with it. They want to move on to another hobby or something. And
Yeah. And if you're saying these snakes are living 40, 50, 60 years, what's the product of all these snakes in 30 years when all of them are adult snakes now? And I mean, I'm sure
yeah,
it's already, yeah, like you said, it's already starting to a certain extent, but
yeah, and my
what do you get
oldest ball python that I still have pictures of me as a teenager with her, wild caught snake, and I still have her, and she's kind of showing her age, but she's still hanging in there. Um, and she's like mid 40s, I think, somewhere around there. But she stopped reproducing before I stopped breeding. So that's another thing. I don't know when ball python females stop breeding, but it's sort of like, well, what do you do with these snakes that you have to put out to pasture? Where do they all go
Yeah.
in 20, 25 years when they no longer want to reproduce? And yeah.
Ball python
Anyway,
snakes.
yeah, this not, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
not my. I'm not trying to be a downer or make everything, like serious or anything, but it is something that we have to consider, I think.
No, for sure. No, no, for sure.
And
While
people need
while
to
we're on,
stop selling sulcata babies at expos and things, and
yes,
alligators and stuff. Like, please stop doing this. Jeez.
for real, I haven't seen them at any expos in quite a while, but every once in a while I'll see the ads on Kijiji, and
Oh,
yeah,
really?
sulcata tortoises for $25, like little caimans for like $80. Like
On
the
Kijiji?
prices, yeah, on Kijiji, that
I didn't
it's
think they were
it's
allowed to do that.
they're
It's
probably not. I assume
yeah,
they're up until somebody catches it, it gets put down, and then gets just
yeah,
get puts back up again.
yeah.
But yeah, I've seen some crazy crazy
Well,
species sold for very very cheap on Kijiji.
yeah, and the thing about Kijiji is I put ads up there, um, and for every, I don't know, I'd say one serious, like, actual buyer or somebody who cares, there's probably 10, like, questionable
Yes.
replies. And there are people I know who, I've seen people write this, like, on Facebook and stuff, like, wanting Kijiji to stop selling animals.
Yes.
And I don't agree with it, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not going to stop. The people who, I mean, the education is there. I mean, Google exists, and there's lots of there. I mean, yes, there's a lot of misinformation, but there's a lot of information too, and there's no real good excuse for it. But stopping the sale of animals on Kijiji is not going to stop any of the bad stuff. That is just saying sweep it under the rug so we don't see it. I want
Yes.
to see it.
Yes.
I'd rather, it's funny.
Rather know it's happening. Yeah.
I was breeding Great Plains rat snakes. So I ghost. I don't know. It's weird why they call them go. They're basically hypo Great Plains rat snakes, right? So I was selling them on Kijiji. This is going back probably 10 years or something. And so I, put what they were, obviously. And somebody sends me a reply saying, uh, that's a corn snake, right? Like,
Yeah.
thanks, right? Like, this is the things I get. And sure enough, like back then you could see their email and you just plug it into your, Facebook, and their account would come up. You can't really do that now,
Yes.
because of privacy and all that. But sure enough, this is somebody who had like a corn snake and a ball python or something, like two snakes, and knew everything. And
Yes.
I kind of go, I wonder if I was like that.
At one point, yeah.
I wonder if but and maybe I was, but we didn't have the internet back then, so I wasn't able to go and tell everybody I was like that. Um, but I was like, what do I even do? Like, I have no idea what I'm breeding, right? This guy's telling me that what I'm selling is wrong. So
Yeah.
I just found a link, like a Wikipedia or whatever, and like emailed back the link. I never heard anything since.
Yeah, because he was wrong, so he never responded. It's
Yeah,
funny. I absolutely, I do think I was also like that. I remember going into like reptile stores and stuff and being like, oh, I know more than these people that work here. And then I became the person working at the reptile store, and I saw people coming in thinking they knew more than me, and I was
I
like, oh,
know.
that was me. I was
Yeah.
that way person. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And now, as the older I get, the more I realize that I'm still learning. Like every day, I'm learning something, and I can't. I also learned that life is busy, and I can't know like every morph of every animal. Like there was a period where I used to get all of the, again, pre-internet. Oh, I have boxes, like literally boxes full of price lists. So I'd look at Reptiles magazine, and I would find like and I would write, because that's how you do it. You'd send them
Wow.
a letter saying, "Can I have a current price list?" And you would be on their mailing list. And so I had all the Glades Herp lists, all the Crutchfields, all everybody, and I still have them all. And I would have all these price lists, and I would
Could
study them. I would know all of the names of like scientific names, and then I would have my encyclopedias and books, and um,
kind
yeah,
of know
what
everything
a
that was coming in, everything that was happening in the hobby.
yeah, and what a different world. And now it's all like, now when I hear people saying, world's first, like breeding, and usually it's a morph of a ball python or something, or maybe
Yes.
it's a corn snake, or what. Yeah, which is, not a bad accomplishment. That's cool, but it's like it should be a world's first species, and that'd be really impressive,
That would be,
like,
yeah,
that's.
absolutely.
But we don't see much of that. It's now people don't like to dabble, and I find some people, probably like us, complain about the lack of diversity in captive bred reptiles and expos and stuff. But there were times where, fairly recent years, I was breeding a lot of different stuff, and people come to the tables at the expo and they go, "Wow, is that ever cool?" They wouldn't buy it because
Buy
they
it.
didn't really, yeah. But then they go and buy like something else. I don't know, like a regular something they knew.
Something more
So
common. Yeah.
yeah, and I still have that. I bring house snakes, breeding African house snakes, and they're such a cool snake. And people go, "Wow, that's really cool," but then they don't buy them.
Yeah.
It's-
That is, you're right. That is part, like a huge part of why people, I think, don't invest the time and energy into working with these rare species. But I do also think that it's starting to slowly flip, and I think
I
people are
think so.
starting to go back to breeding for the love of it, not the money, and kind of
Right.
wanting to work with these rare species. And I think the internet and like being all of us connected online sort of has something to do with like that push, because now
Mm.
you're like, you have that accessibility to talk to somebody that's also doing something similar across the world, and you're like, now you can compare notes. And now I don't know, I
Yeah.
feel like if people are slowly starting to want to get that cool new species now, rather
Yeah.
than like one of the more common ones.
Yeah.
uh,
And I have this sort of disease of when I see an animal that I haven't worked with in years, that I go, oh, that's
I
really
need to,
cool. And you have this like, I should get those again, right?
yes, yes, I know
And
that feeling too well.
yeah, it's just like, man, but
That's very funny. So when you had all these lists and coming in, were you able to purchase and bring things up?
yeah, I did. And it's funny because um, so eventually it got to the point of where um, I got a few CITES animals, and so that took a little more effort.
Hmm.
Really, the effort when it's coming this way is the effort's on the other side. Um,
Right.
but the time, and it took a little more time in that. But for a while, yeah, I would just get you know really common stuff now, like you can get here. But at the time, it was like there was no place to get some of these animals, um, and yeah, I would just have them shipped up, and back then too, the legalities were a lot looser,
Hmm.
right? So and this I'm talking about before I even moved to Florida. This was way before that. Most of the animals that I was getting would, would be coming from the States or somewhere else. That, you
So really, you're responsible for bringing a lot of these species,
know,
and,
I don't
like
know.
growing a hobby in Canada.
I don't know about that because most of the ones I was getting were like pets that never bred. Like
Hmm.
sometimes they did, but eventually, now when I had my business started, then I was doing a lot of importing of corn snake morphs and stuff like that. But before that, it was more or less like every type of toad that I could afford, or like it
And
didn't
it
matter.
makes
Oh, that one's only $4. I want that. So I wasn't breeding them. I was just they were pets,
you
right?
just had them.
And
Yeah, okay, yeah.
and I don't see a lot of that. I'm starting to see it a little bit more. And the reason why I even bring this up is because as somebody who breeds, corn snakes, um, they are, in my opinion, the pretty much the ultimate, you know, first pet snake. And one of the misconceptions when people see them, and again, I think this is because like they'll see ball pythons or a boa or something like that and go, those babies are robust and they look like
A
okay,
snake.
that's not as delicate. But man, for my money, you could take a baby corn snake over a ball python any day as far as how well they're going to do right off the bat. And and I'm talking about in the hands of a beginner. Like ball pythons, captive bred ones are great and they usually eat really well. Um, but even like sand boas, for example, it's hard to really screw up a baby sand boa. But the first little while, maybe 3 months, a lot of them want live food, and that's just the way they are.
The
And
beginner keeper is not going to do that.
no, usually not. Sometimes, but and if they do, where do they get it? Right? Are they going to start breeding live mice? They have to go to a store to get them. It's a whole other thing. Whereas they could go to most pet stores and get frozen pinkies. But corn snakes, they're small, but they look delicate, right? Um, I'm trying to think of why we even got into this topic, but the
No, but,
point being,
no, but that's a good point. Do you think that you said you think corn snakes are the ultimate first pet? Um,
from my experience, yeah, and I have
yeah,
had a lot of experience with a lot of different snakes, so
right.
they're you just check off all of the points, right? Think of the things about them. How big do they get? They're not going to need their own apartment. They're reasonably sized. They need a little bit of space, but they're not huge.
Yeah,
Um, the colors, if you're really into morphs and that, you can get a purple one, you can get a yellow one, you get a red one, whatever. There's a lot going on there.
yes.
The temperaments are great. They eat dead food, no problem. They're tolerant to temperature fluctuations. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I'll give you the one argument for ball pythons.
Okay,
It's I think it's the lack of movement. I think that's a big
yeah,
thing as well. I think people want the animal to be able to just put it on their lap and watch TV, whereas corn
and it
snakes
does.
are kind of always having to, yeah, always having
I
to
don't
like,
know. To me, it's like if you have a snake, wouldn't you want it to feel like a snake, like moving?
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
I find, yeah, ball pythons. There is that. Although I made a mistake um, way back. My first ball python, which I still have, so the story ends well. But yeah, it was one of those things where I sat her on my bed and I went around cleaning cages in my bedroom. I was still living with my parents, right? I was a kid basically, going around cleaning cages and stuff, and I had tanks lining all the walls in my bedroom. And I left her on my bed. She's just sitting there in a ball. What's she gonna do, right? But she disappeared, and I couldn't find her for the longest time. So it was the lesson in how to tear apart an entire room until you find a snake, and then give up and go. She disappeared. You know what she was doing is going underneath my dresser and into the
Into the one of
drawer.
the
So you
drawers.
open the drawer and there she is. Like, oh, okay. Um, So there's an argument for keeping ball pythons in sliding drawers.
Yeah, that's exactly where they went. Yeah.
That's what you wanted. Yeah, and that was just my own stupidity and learning a lesson, right? As somebody who now every time I sell a snake to people, I insult their intelligence by telling them, do not underestimate the ability
Of
for a snake to escape. Like
yes.
never, yeah. And
Escape.
almost every year I get a call or three from people saying the snake is gone, and uh, almost always they manage to find it again. So that's good, because I always tell them, like, look high and low, don't leave anything unturned. It might be up in the curtain rod or something, like, surprising, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I have had my fair share of escapees in the reptile room, and every single one of them has come back. Like, not, I don't say come back, but I usually will find within the first like
yeah,
24 hours.
yeah,
Like I usually like will let the day run out and then turn off the lights and sit there with a flashlight in the dark, and
yeah,
they usually pop up. But yeah, all of them have been geckos, not snakes. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure
yeah.
that that's
Usually, even snakes, I find that's often,
the
lights
best way.
off and then go back
Yeah,
an hour later and turn on the lights, and then it's sitting there like,
in the
oh,
middle of the room, like,
yeah,
oh no, I got
yep,
caught. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Um, all right. So while we've jumped off through a few controversial topics, why don't we
Oh,
jump?
I can get more, but
Yeah, I'm about to throw one more at you. So you've been
okay.
breeding corn snakes for a while. Do you work with scaleless corn snakes?
No, and
What's your opinion on them?
I it's a weird thing. I have a stronger opinion about hybrids. I'm not. That's not um, the. How do I say this? My opinion about hybrids is a negative one, and that's because even if they're being kept in captivity, and that's the intention, it's not always. Animals get out, people let them go. So there's that. I mean, we're not talking about just Canada where they might not survive. There are other places in the world where they
Yes.
will. So just about scaleless snakes, I don't really. It's weird because I don't have a strong opinion. I'm not really interested in working with them necessarily, but I held the first one that I've ever held last year. One of the another corn snake breeder. I think that's mainly her thing is scaleless corn snakes. And I was talking to her and I said, I've never even touched one. So she brought one over to the table so I could hold it. And it's like, kind of felt like what I expected, actually. It's pretty neat. Um,
Yeah.
do
Like
I,
skin.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you're talking to somebody who has three hairless cats. So, but I don't know. I don't know what to think. And that's just me being as honest as I can. I don't think it's the downfall of the hobby or anything, but I'm not sure.
What you think? Yeah. Do you know what gene was altered to be able to create? Does that make sense? I don't even know if this question makes sense.
I really don't know. I haven't researched them that much just because I haven't. And when I say I'm not interested in working with them, it's not because, again, because I have a strong opinion one way or another, or because I don't like the look of them. It's just I have enough going on where I don't need to complicate my. I have I have morphs. I'm not even joking. I have, like, every year certain groups of corn snakes that I'm like, I'm going, what the hell is that? I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I hold them back for like 6 months, going, okay, I think it's this. And then when I sell them, I'm like, okay, me being honest, this is what I think it is. It's got this, this, and this, and there might be some of that because you don't even know. And so for me, throwing in a whole other thing like scaleless into my mix of complications, I'm just like, and which as another, we were talking about the ages of snakes and stuff and how long
Right.
they live. Um, People, this might come as a shock, but people are also mortal. So as I'm getting older,
Yes.
I start to go, like, how many times am I going to keep holding snakes back for future breeders? Because there will be a point where, I mean, some of the animals that I have now might very likely outlive me as it is.
Right.
So at what point do I
And then
just
what do you do
say,
at that point? Yeah.
should I let this? So I am kind of at the point, not because I'm like thinking of my death, but but because I'm thinking about the fact that I don't want a pile of animals that are just somebody else has to deal with.
Right.
And I also, as I get older, my I still have some pain and stuff from my car accident and just life. So I'm kind of like, yeah, do I really want to keep increasing my workload? So I'm kind of getting at a point where I've been scaling down, no pun intended, for several years, well, more than several years. I'm trying to keep it manageable. And more than that, the other part of that trying to keep it manageable is it's more enjoyable for me when I can really spend time with the animals. And it's also um, the fewer animals I have, the better environment that I can give them, a little more space. And because I don't want to be like, you get to a point sometimes I find, like, at least I do, where I'm kind of sick of seeing animals in cages. I want to go out and see them in nature. And so the more animals that I have, and then I feel to myself, am I keeping them as well as I can be keeping them? Do they have the quality of life they deserve? Um, and so numbers mean a lot less to me now than they did at one point.
For sure.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone herping in any of the species that you keep native range?
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, Now, the only hognose snake I've ever found was a southern hognose snake in Florida, believe it or not, which is really cool. But I found a number. Corn snakes aren't just falling off every tree down south like some people think,
Yes.
but I have seen quite a few of them and um, caught a lot. And some of the stock that I still have to this day come from way back wild caught that I caught. I
You
didn't
by
keep it.
yourself?
Yeah, when I lived down there. No, I other times I visited down there, I caught them, but I didn't keep them. Right? It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
um, and that's another thing where that has changed, at least for me, was the idea of, like, keeping everything you catch or catching everything you see. And now I'm I just like to take pictures. And sometimes I'll manipulate them a bit to get a shot or whatever. And I'm no photographer, but it's just for me, right? I like to,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And you don't know how much you're stressing the animal out when you're picking it up in the wild,
yeah,
and laws per where you are too. Some places don't allow you to
true.
touch the animals all the
And
time, but it's
sometimes it's hard not to mess with stuff.
especially when you love it so much. Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but there is that thing, and like, even in here around, well, I'll go herping or just hiking, not necessarily intentionally herping, but I'll go out looking for everything that I can see and just enjoying nature every chance I get. And if I see a garter snake, I always have this thing of, like, do I need to catch the snake because it's gonna musk all over my hands and it's gonna smell disgusting, and
For the rest of the hike.
yeah, and it's like no matter what you do, like I often in the car I'll just have a little bottle of soapy water for, because if you want to help a turtle cross the road or something, that's pretty gross too. So I have hand sanitizer, but that little soapy water kind of helps, like dish soap
Helps.
or whatever. But even
Very smart.
not, it doesn't do it for a garter snake musking. It's still not enough. It's like, oh
Smelling it for
well,
3 days afterwards.
yeah. It's like, well, I'm not going out for lunch now. Like,
Absolutely. That's very funny. Awesome. Okay. Well, okay. Maybe before we wrap it up,
sure.
couple more questions for you. First of all, did you see anything in the wild that inspired when you were catching or seeing the corn snakes or hognose or whatever that inspired your captive keeping?
Um, well, one of the things was, remember I said corn snakes like to climb,
Yes.
and more than once I've seen them so far up in the trees that any hope of catching them is long gone. Like, you're like looking up, going, "Wow, that's like way up there."
Oh,
Um, so that's always stuck in my mind. That seeing them in nature, that they like to climb and are really good at it.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. Okay,
yeah.
and then being somebody that's seen the hobby grow and change over the last um X amount of years. Um, how do you project that it will? it'll be moving forward? Like, what do you see the future of the hobby?
It's a good question, and I think you're right about the that it is changing. That people are interested in other species now. That they are seeing that there's more. But sometimes the the gateway is it used to be a turtle, right?
Yes, yes.
Unfortunately, but now often they're animals like a corn snake or a gecko or like crested gecko or something like that. And then people bearded dragons is a big one. Whenever I do my shows, I bring out a rescued bearded dragon that I have, and there's never a birthday party or a school show or anything, never that somebody in the crowd, one of these kids either knows what it is or they have one.
Bearded dragon.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and whether that's good or not, bringing the beard, it gives me a chance to explain why it's a rescue animal. And I say that a lot. I have a lot of rescue animals, even though my business is not a rescue.
Yeah.
I love animals, right? And so that's how a lot of them ended up in my hands. Um, but I think that's what's going to happen. I think that at least I hope people are starting to get into other species. That's from a breeding and uh, pet, which is another thing. I find a lot of people now are starting to ask for pets. They're not always going. I want a breeder.
I want a
I want
breeding bear. Yeah, or a
yeah,
breeder. Yeah.
they want a pet, and I think that's a good thing because there was a point where it's like, why wouldn't you breed it? Like, but now I think there are enough people breeding, and it's there are enough animals in captivity. I think the idea of um, just having a pet and having that connection to reptiles, and I think that's going to happen more. And I think the other thing is a lot of great uh, young keepers, like and young. I say that not just young, but newer um, people come in with like real enthusiasm that is contagious. It's exciting, and I don't do enough expos. I don't do as many as I used to. Maybe two, three a year at the most. But every time I do, I get talking to people who are really new and
Enthusiastic.
enthusiastic, um, and that's exciting for the future. I think
And they
knowing
come
that
in with a
there's
fresh perspective as well. New
yeah,
ideas.
and absolutely, and I think that's something to always keep in mind. Like again, we were talking about being younger and kind of cocky, and that, and I don't see. You see a bit of that on the internet. Well, you see a lot of that on the internet.
You
Where
see a lot of that on the internet,
yeah,
especially on
but yeah,
Facebook.
I don't. But you know what? It's not just reptile people, right? It's
Almost
everything,
everything.
and I
Yeah.
don't understand it, but I try to just ignore it. I don't know. And then the one thing that I don't like is in groups where well, I don't know, any local herp group, and then somebody is new and they're doing something that may be frowned upon or whatever, and then people just rip them a new one,
Bash them. Yeah.
and it's like that, and then their whole thing is, well, I'm passionate, and it's like that's not. You can be passionate without being a jerk.
Yes.
If you want to help people, that's passionate. If you want to educate them um, properly, that's being passionate. And
Educate, don't criticize.
yeah, and I think that's, but I don't see as much of that in person. But people on,
Hiding behind the keyboards. Absolutely. Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
easy to be nasty, and I don't think being mean spirited is the way to go. Um, and you know what? The other thing I've learned is um, there, and this is talking about the future of keeping. It's it's the same as not the same, but it's like this is the evolution. Is that um, for everything we're learning, one thing I know is that there's always, almost always, more than one way to do things. So the way I do things may not be the way somebody else does. That doesn't mean they're wrong and I'm right, or what, that we can learn from each other. But if we're afraid to share our experiences because somebody's going to be bashing you online, um, then people clam up and they're not sharing, and we need that. We need that communication, and um, I think that's
Communication is the
important.
only way to get this hobby to move forward. I absolutely.
Yeah,
And like I
and we don't seem as united as we should be a lot of times.
said, yes, and it's it's a little shocking to me, especially like not throwing shade or anything, but like as a Canadian hobby, we're super small community, and
Mm,
still there's tends to be politics and all that, and it makes no sense to me because as such a small community, you'd think we'd all be wanting to get along so that we can, fight the bylaw problems like you were saying earlier, or
yeah,
fight
yeah,
these kind of things together. But
yeah,
hopefully,
yeah,
hopefully that comes soon. Hopefully, I
yeah.
also think with as the hobby grows and with more people coming into it, that may slowly become less of a possibility.
Mm,
As the
yeah,
community gets bigger, more people are gonna disagree with each other, I guess.
yeah.
But
Well, I
it
guess
yeah,
it's like like I was saying earlier about the size of the expos, for example, when I first started doing them,
yeah,
um, versus the way they are now, where um, you know, I'm not saying that there has to be an accountability for your prices or anything. That's not really my point. I guess my point is you kind of knew everybody, so you all had to. It was a lot harder to
there was a lot of respect.
yeah, there was respect. That's I guess what I'm saying. Now people, they could be at the expos, and like sometimes I see people and I as I'm loading in and I'm like waving at them, and it's like the only time I actually ever see them is loading in and loading out. I never even had a conversation with them, but you almost feel a kinship because you're at the same expo and you see them a couple times a year or something. But uh, that's yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. I guess just the fact that as it grows, you don't have the same accountability or the same respect because you don't know everybody
You don't know
anymore.
everybody. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. There's less people holding you account. More people,
yeah,
but less people holding you accountable to a
yeah.
certain extent.
Well, you know what you were saying about how you were reading my website and you didn't know of a bunch of things that I had done and stuff,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
Yeah,
it's odd. Like I think, man, I was writing for like you remember when I got all these price lists and
yeah.
I'm looking at people like Bill and Kathy Love and Ken Foose and uh, Dick Bartlett and all these people who are writing for Reptiles magazine, and years later I was writing for like alongside of them basically. So it was like almost
That's
like a
awesome.
dream come true. I was part of that group. Now you talk to people about Reptiles magazine, they're like, "What's that?"
What's
They're
that?
just like,
Nobody even. Yeah,
and
yeah.
that was like huge. And I'm going, well, glad I can contribute. Like nobody, I was almost famous there for a while, and now it's like, you know, um, and now people like Reptile Rainforest. What's that? Like, you know
No,
what I
that
mean?
that well, at least here in Ottawa, you've made a good name for yourself. Reptile Rainforest is still known, like, I
Well,
think it's
that's
still fairly known, and like people say, still recommending you for snakes when people, or that's at least what I hear, what I see.
yeah,
But yeah, Reptiles magazine. It's sad because I used to read it a lot growing up as well, and now it seems that it's impossible to
yeah.
see anyone who's even remembers it.
I think there's still an online version.
There is,
Like,
they are still
yeah,
releasing it. Yes,
I
yes.
did do a couple of their online articles, but I was also like Bowtie, which is uh, the production. So they did. They were fancy publications at first, so it was like Bird Talk and Cat Fancy and Reptiles Magazine and Reptiles USA and all. It was a whole umbrella, and they changed to Bowtie, and they were doing all that as well.
Hmm.
Um, and they also had pet product news, and I was writing like 2 articles a month for them.
Are
So
they
I mean,
still
what's that?
Are they still around?
No, well, the publication company is, I guess, if they're doing the Reptiles channel, but I was like busy, like I worked a lot. I think part of that was the reason they liked me was because I could write, but I also knew the animals that I work with, and I could take pictures of the animals that I worked with, and so the subject. There's some people that would write, but they were just writing about a subject, whereas they weren't living they weren't immersed in it, and or the other way around. So that's how. And I never said no to anything, deadlines, article assignments. I just like because they
So
were
how, if you were
paying
to
me well.
estimate, were they okay?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
they were paying me really well. I can't believe, and I had the at least the common sense to know that it wasn't going to last forever. But for a few years there, it was like steady work in American money, and they treated me really well, and we, built some good relationships with some of the people there. Yeah,
That's awesome. If you were
yeah.
to estimate how many papers you've written or whatever? How many would you guesstimate?
It's over 100, but that's all I can.
That's
I lost. I
awesome.
have those big, huge Rubbermaid bins. Like I have a few of them full of magazines that all have my articles,
Wow.
and they're heavy. I can't pick them up. Like two people, and then I'm pretty sure they're gonna break those Rubbermaid things. So if I ever have to move them anywhere, I'm gonna have to do something. But now, to be fair, a lot of those are duplicates too, so they'd send me two copies, so I would have two. But that's
Right.
still a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'd like to actually organize them sometime and get them, maybe even digitize them, so I have all of that
All of them.
somewhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. That is awesome. Okay, well, on that note, Darren, first of all, thank you very, very much for coming on for doing this.
Yeah,
That was super interesting.
yeah,
Um,
we covered a lot of bizarre topics.
yeah, yeah. I think we covered some very interesting topics, some controversial topics. So stay
Yeah,
tuned to find out what people think. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah. It's just like people are typing right now. I'm like, how
Yeah,
dare
once
you say that?
what do you mean? You're just gonna get a bunch of messages of
Yeah.
people mad. I know that it won't happen. Don't worry, you're good. I
Uh,
think a lot of people will agree with the opinions you've said here today. But yeah, can you before you let everyone know where they can find you? Can you let everyone know if they are in the Ottawa, I guess, and Kemptville region, or I don't know how far you do your shows, but how can somebody find you and book a show? And then where
um,
can people find you online?
okay, so reptilerainforest.com. That's the best way to find me, the best way to contact me. Just email me from there. I am on Facebook and on Instagram. So I have both of those. However, if you send me a message there, it may die there because I'm really bad at that part of social media. But yeah, reptilerainforest.com. You can email me. Um, I travel pretty far sometimes for shows. Um, just depends what it's for and if it's worth it for you for me to travel um, that far. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Everyone go find those links in the show notes in the description. Darren, once again, thank you very much for coming on and doing this.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast. I've done so many of these things for like a podcast or shows for music, tons of them. But this is the first time I've done one for reptiles.
Really? That's awesome. Well,
Yeah,
I'm honored to be the first. We'll
yeah,
have to
I'm
bring
really excited about. I was thinking about that earlier, going, man, this is so cool. I get to talk about reptiles.
reptiles. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
always much fun. What's better than coming on and just chatting reptiles with someone else that loves
absolutely.
reptiles, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. But yeah, like I said, we'll
And
do it again at some point.
yeah,
And
do show and tell next time. I'll bring some up and
yeah, for sure. That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Sweet. Everyone, once again, show notes. Go give Darren a follow on Instagram, Facebook. Check out his website, and yeah, we will see you on the next one.